Good afternoon. Welcome back to the third session today of the PENC Virtual Raleigh Seminar. I'm Katie Cox, PENC Membership Director, and I'll be facilitating again this afternoon. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat box and I will try to assist you. We will be taking questions through the questions box and I will read those out loud to our presenters. There are a few poll questions today, so please make sure you are responding to those polls when they pop up. Our speakers today are Jeff Roman and Carol Rickard-Bordeaux. Jeff Roman is a partner and the engineering practice leader for Little, responsible for the direction and growth of a nationwide team of engineers. Mr. Roman earned his BS in civil engineering from Lawrence Tech and an executive MBA from the University of Florida. He is the former owner of 2 small businesses who has contributed to articles in PE Magazine and Fortune and has spoken at NSPE and PSMJ national conferences. Carol Rickard-Bordeaux is the corporate president for Little. Over her 38 years in practice as an architect, Carol has been involved in pitches and presentations to clients, employees, students, and municipalities to teach, convey design outcomes, and win work. Each audience is looking for something different in those presentations, and her job is to figure out what that is and how to convey the information in the most interesting and engaging way possible. Jeff and Carol, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. We're happy to be here and good to be with everybody. For those of you that took part in Ray Cox's presentation this morning on communication, I think what you're going to find here is that we're going to be building off of some of those themes. So it's a good thing that we got scheduled after his, because I know I was entertained this morning and I learned some good stuff and some great reminders. And so hopefully what Carol and I have for you here today will continue to help you in your communication efforts.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right in. Let's see. I say that and then we're not advancing. Okay, here we go. So what you see up on your screen right now is a quote from 106 BC. And it shows really that since the beginning of what we call civilized society, people have used persuasive oratory to build consensus, which many of us obviously in this audience need when we're pitching ideas and solutions to our teams and our clients. What we're going to talk about now with regard to persuasive presentations is basically we're talking about influence. Influence disables our cognitive security system. So you see these babies on the screen. It's so simple that even a baby can do it. There's certain triggers that are based on human neurobiology that convey meaning and convey ideas beyond words, devices, and even honestly beyond awareness. The human brain, how we speak, how we use different words, how we sound, interprets what we see and hear and either accepts it or kind of refutes it, pushes back on it a little bit. So knowing the best ways to present information to have your audience accept the things that you want them to is extremely useful. We talk about it in terms of supersuasion, which is kind of an actually now in the advent of super spreader events, it may not be the best portmanteau that we could come up with, but supersuasion really what we're talking about is that sweet spot that occurs at the center of this Venn diagram with biology, neuroscience, and psychology. Have you ever had that dream where you have to speak and you're not prepared? That fear response comes from a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is your fight or flight center in your brain. It's also called your reptilian brain. Interestingly enough, it can also be used to accomplish the reverse in your audience. And knowing the techniques and the things that you can, the way that you present and the things that you say can actually make all the difference in your success.
So before you can become a super persuader, you need to understand what are your natural skills. What are your abilities? How do you figure out what you want to tell somebody and how you're going to do it? How are they going to want to hear that information? And so you may have heard back in high school or maybe college, videotape yourself, watch that recording. You cringe at all of those mistakes, but it is, it's those opportunities to see what those habits are and to change them. And so you record yourself a couple of times and you see yourself resolving those habits by being critical and realizing what you're doing. So if, in terms of figuring this out, during my MBA program, I had a class and it was presentations, and the entire grade was based on the final presentation. That was the only grade for the whole class. And so as we went along, we would record ourselves. The professor would watch it, give us feedback, critique us. And at one point, he said to me, you've got to plant your feet and you've got to stop rocking back and forth. And I said, I'm not rocking back and forth. He said, hang on a second, let me put this in fast forward. And you see me going back and forth and back and forth. And at the time I had 2 young kids, toddlers. So I was used to rocking with the babies and everything. And he showed it to me how it was pronounced. And he said, okay, now what I need you to do is that's your nervous energy that's got you rocking back and forth. We need to have you put that into your voice, put that into your hands. Let's get some gestures going. Let's get some vocal inflection going. Let's make you more interesting and let's get you planted. So thinking about yourself, what are you good at? What do you need to work on? What are your strengths in terms of presenting? What are your weaknesses? One way that I've been able to improve on this is I have an intro to engineering presentation that I created, I don't know how many years ago. And I've gone in and talked to college students and high school students, and it's essentially the same presentation. It's the same content. And so what I started doing was I started trying to work on specific things with each time I did it. So one time I focused on lots of hand gestures. One time I focused on a lot of vocal inflection. One time I really focused on like eye contact with the audience and learning when did it get weird enough that it's time to move on, to the next person, because now you're starting to get creepy. So if you have an opportunity like that, whether you practice doing something and record it, or whether you've got this opportunity in maybe an environment, like what I'm doing with the students is, it's obviously I'm not trying to win a job. So it's great. It's a great opportunity to practice some new skills, but practice, practice, practice. So if there's only one slide in this whole presentation that you remember, it's this one here. If you know what you're talking about, you'll never get lost in what you're trying to say. So you're going to know the complexities, the stories that you want to tell. It's going to give you that confidence you need and deflect some of that pressure away from yourself. And then, your mom was right. There is no way around it. You've got to prepare, practice, 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 and then practice some more. You can't wing it. And then, writing out your material, this is something that helps you to imprint it into your memory. You can hear yourself saying it. It helps you to organize things. But one of the big things here, and this is something that I've had to learn, is not memorize it. Because when you try to memorize it, especially when you're giving a really long presentation, you're going to forget something, and then it's going to get you flustered, and then you're going to get off track and you're going to lose your train of thought. So by knowing what you're talking about and practicing, you'll know it. You'll be ready to go when the time comes. And practicing out loud allows you to also put yourself into the position of the listener. And so you can listen to yourself in terms of what is your rhythm, what is your flow, trying out maybe different words out loud, seeing what helps you nail that concept that you're trying to communicate.
So now I think we're at our first poll. And the question is going to be, where do you have the most trouble typically with persuasive presentations?
All right, so wow, pretty evenly divided. Public speaking and finding the time to practice. I would think that's probably pretty consistent for most people, followed by keeping the audience interest, and then not so much really on the visual aids. And hopefully that's because you've got a great marketing team and graphic designers that help you put a lot of that stuff together.
So what we're going to talk with you about, what we're going to talk to you today about are 5 techniques that should help you. And the best way to remember that is through this mnemonic device, SPECS. So we're going to think about seeing clearly through SPECS. And it stands for simple, positive, empathetic, confident, and story. Those are the 5 elements that we're really going to talk about. And the 5 elements that we think are really important for you to remember to construct your own persuasive presentation. All right, so we begin with simple. The Gettysburg Address, which is maybe arguably the most important oratorical touchstone that we have in this country, up there with ask not what you can do for your country, or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, was 10 sentences long. 10 sentences. I mean, that's amazing. So talk about a short, distilled, to the point and sticky presentation. It's something we still talk about now. Lincoln wasn't even the keynote speaker that day. The keynote speaker spoke after him. His name was Everett Edwards. He spoke for 2 hours and nobody remembers a word from his speech or even that he was involved. So it's an important thing to remember. As engineers, you are frequently going to be presenting things to a client or to colleagues or to an audience, basically, that are way more complex than they can comprehend. To get buy-in, it's really critical that you learn how to express a complicated concept in easy to understand terms. So when a cook, if any of you in the audience are cooks, you'll understand reducing the sauce. So when somebody who's cooking reduces a sauce, what they're doing is cooking it so that it actually physically reduces so that you've got the essence of that flavor, whatever that flavor is. You need to do the same thing with your presentation. You got to make it easy for people to understand what you're talking about, and more importantly, they want to feel the emotion of what you're talking about. So, and you want them to get that, to connect to that emotion that you're talking about. So going back to our friend the amygdala that I talked about before, when we get emotional, our brain is stimulated in a way that sharpens our memories for that time period and makes things easier to remember. So there's actual neurobiology that's involved there as well. So you've heard that phrase, you won't always remember what everyone says, but you remember how they make you feel. That's kind of what we're talking about now.
I know that sometimes I bounce things off of my middle school boys, and if they can't understand it, I probably don't have it simple enough, and I need to simplify it a little bit more. So don't bury the lead. You know, this is something that I've heard in every communications class that I've had. Sometimes it's referred to as the hook, and what they tell you is you need to hook your audience right away. Do something that grabs their attention. Use a story, a quote or a fact, a rhetorical question. You know, even humor, although sometimes that you got to be careful with that. But you know, what I've heard is that you have less than 60 seconds at the start of your presentation for the audience members to decide whether or not they're going to listen to what you're saying or start checking their email. So start with your big idea, your simple big idea, and then start getting into the details. So one of the things that we do when we're preparing presentations at Little is the next 2 slides. And this first one, framing the question, if we do nothing else during the presentation, we must convey what? So as Carol and I go through and we're preparing for this, okay, we're talking persuasive presentations. If there's nothing else we do, we have to convey to the audience which ideas. And then we ask ourselves, what is the single most important thing we must communicate? So we ask ourselves this when we're looking at every slide for a presentation that we're doing for, say, a pitch to a client. What is the single most important thing that we want the client to get out of this slide that we're showing them? And if you can put everything into that context, it's really going to help you simplify, keep things to those basic thoughts, things that'll be memorable.
So does anyone in the audience know what Occam's razor is, also called the law of parsimony? I'm guessing that you may be one of the few groups that I talk to who actually does understand what that is. In the 14th century, William of Ockham basically said not to make things more complicated than they need to be to explain them. Make sure that you only include the stuff you need to convey an idea in this context. So when you're speaking, use analogies, use metaphors that save on words, and they make your idea more relatable. So when we talk about the brain as a computer, well, obviously the brain's not really a computer, but people get the idea from the metaphor that you're using. Shorthand is really important because there are only so many words that you can listen to, and honestly, listening is pretty hard work for an audience. The problem that we have is that we know all this other stuff, right? You're immersed in the ideas, and you know all the nits and gnats and the details behind how you've gotten to where you are and all the systems and that good stuff. But we tend, because we know all that stuff, to overcomplicate, we overthink, we drape layer upon layer of details, and we get so far in the weeds that we kind of lose our audience a lot of times. But no more. Hopefully by using this process, you are forced to edit. As designers, we'll frequently rattle off a list of elements rather than how you might feel in a space or the outcome, how the user will benefit from it. Those are the things we want to make sure that we're conveying. So when I talk about editing, you have to be ruthless. You have to, we spend so much time usually on the stuff or making the presentation that we forget that we're communicating, and we fuss over, a presentation, the spacing, the images, what we're showing, all that stuff. It doesn't honestly matter. If you have lousy images, but what you're saying is really engaging and sticky and easy to remember, that'll make the difference between that and if you have great images, but what you say really doesn't resonate or stick with your audience. Just a quick thing on PowerPoints. I just love showing this slide because it's so insane. This is a real slide. There's that graphic side of presentations. This has got to be maybe one of the world's worst PowerPoint slides ever created, and it's a real slide. It is about military operations in Afghanistan. So it's one of the things that you never want to do. You want to make sure that you keep images graphic, you want to have minimal text. You want to make sure they're legible, that there's some visual hierarchy on them. Seeing a bit of something is better to help you understand than seeing all of it and understanding none of it. And recognize that older eyes can't always see the detail, the small, low contrast stuff. You want to make sure there's high contrast, and think about, where's your audience sitting? Are they across the room, or are they sitting like now at their screen where they can actually see more detail? The best slides, I think, lead the audience to make the connection. So you don't always have to be literal, but you can find a clever reference to the concept that you're trying to convey and do that.
That slide makes me laugh every time. It's just crazy how,
yes, it's crazy.
I mean, no wonder we couldn't figure out what we were doing in terms of our military policy at the time. Nobody could follow any of those lines. So, all right, so we've talked about keeping it simple. Now we're going to talk about positive. And this is, thinking about framing your presentation in a way that you can show a direct positive benefit to your listener. So, if you can feel their pain, you can understand where their splinters are. And then they're going to relax, they're going to build trust in you, and they're going to be more interested in what you have to say. So having, it's always thinking about, well, who is my audience? What am I trying to convey to them? If you can put yourself in their shoes, think about what are they going to care most about? What are their concerns, and what am I going to provide them in this presentation, or how am I going to alleviate those concerns? Helping to frame them into that positive mindset. This is another great quote from our late founder, Bill Little. He would always say, don't tell them how to build the watch, tell them what they can do with the watch. How many times have you seen that car commercial and they just spend 30 seconds listing off the features of the car? You never see that. It's always the car's driving and running over rugged roads, and there's some country song playing, and it leaves you, with this really memorable, sticky image in your brain. You have no idea, did the car have a V6 or a V8? Does it have a safety package on it? They don't care, because they're trying to grab your attention, keep your attention, and leave you with some kind of positive emotional feeling. Too often when we're doing architectural and engineering presentations, as Carol said, we focus on these specific design elements and the intent of why we're doing it that way and everything else. Instead, we need to focus on presenting how are people going to feel, and how are they going to heal, and how are they going to work and relate in that space. So what's important to your listener? What is the experience that you want them to have? You know, it's interesting. I was talking to one of our architects the other day. We were talking about improving communications between our architecture group and our engineering group. And he said, you know, sometimes I just want to say to them, I don't need a dissertation. I just need the answer. I trust you. You're experts. Just give me the answer so we can both move on. I don't need the 5-minute diatribe. So just keep that in mind with your presentations. All right, so we've got simple, we've got positive. Now we have empathy. Because when you have empathy, you're understanding the pain of your audience, putting you into their headspace, and identifying what's really important for them. So during my MBA, I had a different communications class, and the professor would constantly remind us, you need to turn your radio dial to WII-FM. And does anybody know what WII-FM stands for? If we were in a live presentation, we'd be able to get that, but we're gonna go ahead and give it to you anyway. And it's what's in it for me. Your audience is like this 4-year-old who's constantly saying to you, me, what's in it for me? All I care about is me. So, you know, Bill Little would say to us always, what's in it for the other guy? Put yourself in the shoes of the client. What's in it for them? What do they really want to know? So this is where that understanding of who your audience is so crucial to keeping their attention. Okay, you put yourself in your shoes, what's important to them, what are the pain points I'm trying to solve, and prove to them why they should be listening to you by showing them that you understand them and what their issues are. So we have this mirror neuron in our brains, and it always will result in all of the above outcomes. You know, when somebody yawns, we tend to yawn back. When we see somebody crying, we tend to want to cry. And then when babies are smiling at us, like this cute picture of Carol here when she was a youngling, you know, it just makes you want to smile right back. So this mirror neuron, it helps us to relate to one another. It helps us read the room. You know, we can use the reflections of our listeners' interests or the boredom in a way that helps us steer the story, steer the conversation to make sure we're keeping their interest. So empathy and emotion builds stickiness, and it helps make something easier to remember. So anything emotional is going to activate those certain receptors in our brain. It helps us commit something to memory. So we always need to make sure we're appealing to that emotion.
Okay, so our next,
sorry.
Our next, sorry, there we go. Next letter is C, which stands for confident, because people want to follow a confident leader. I think we've got a poll question now. Hopefully that's being deployed. There we go. The question is, what have you found to be the most effective, or how do you prefer to hook your audience at the start of your presentation?
All right, so we've got a pretty neck and neck. It's either with a story or with humor, and very few folks are using a rhetorical question or a quote or a fact. So, wow, that's pretty surprising for an audience of engineers. I figured it'd be like 90% we were using facts on them, but that's great to see stories and or humor.
So as I was saying, our next letter is C for confident, and I think the easiest way to relate to that is basically to think about, you know, have you ever listened to someone who's super confident? And I don't mean arrogant, but somebody who, you know, based on the way they're speaking about a subject, you know that they're going to find a way to be successful. There's a tendency to want to follow someone like that. You know, you believe in someone like that. You want to do what they're talking about. So that confidence is a really important thing. It's a way to build followership. It's a way to kind of get the audience on your side, because you're like, hey, I've got this great idea. And if you're believable enough and you sell it because you're confident in it, then your audience is likely to go along with you. To show you what I mean, you'd have a much different reaction to this than you would to this. Difference between just do it and I'm thinking about it. So as I was saying, confidence is really critical, but you really have to believe what you're talking about, because if you don't, it shows. And in order to be able to sell something or to be able to be persuasive, you really have to be confident in what you're talking about. And you have to find a way, honestly, to be confident in it. So if you're talking about something you don't really believe, you have to find a way to get it to where you do believe it, so that when you talk about it, your audience understands you're being authentic, you're being truthful, and your belief is self-evident in the way that you talk about things.
There's a great TED Talk, Amy Cuddy from, I think, a couple years ago, the Fake It Till You Make It. And she talks about some strategies to boost up your confidence in terms of your body posture and things like that, to kind of get yourself pumped up and help you with before you go out on stage or whatever and start your presentation.
Yeah, there are definitely techniques that you can use, and I'm going to advance. Sorry. Now that we're having to deal with Zoom calls, that's a whole different world. And it's a different kind of obviously being in somebody's presence is very different than just being this big, in a window. So you have to be aware of your face, your facial expressions. You have to probably be much more expressive. You have to use your hands in this zone. You can't use them out here because they're not always visible. You have to vary the timbre of your voice. You have to punch up a word, so that, again, you're trying to keep people's attention, because it's difficult to listen, period. And it's super difficult to listen on Zoom, simply because everybody's on Zoom calls all day long. And it's really important to be able to give your audience something to hang on to, something that helps them stay engaged. And it's harder to read the room because you're not seeing your audience. So you just have to really emote, you have to really be expressive, and you have to make sure that you keep your energy up. So again, you're helping out the folks that are listening on the other end of that. If you are ever presenting in a mask, that's a whole different story. And I'm not sure if a lot of people are doing presentations right now, but what I would say are the things you need to remember are keep your voice loud, because you're talking through a filter, and also to make sure that you're slowing down and enunciating more, because the sound of your voice, obviously, by going through that filter, it's more of a challenge and it's harder for people to understand. So by slowing it down a little bit and regulating your speech, you're giving them a chance to stay with you as you speak through that mask. And obviously, the only thing they're going to be seeing is above your mask. So your eyes have to become real expressive. But the good thing about humans is that when we smile, we can tell the difference between a real smile and a fake smile, because when we really smile, the corner of our eyes kind of crinkle. So you want to, again, sort of exaggerate the responses that you have under your mask, so that that little piece of face that's showing can convey the things that you're feeling at that time. Another way of doing it, when Jeff was talking before about practicing out loud, one of the reasons why it's really important to practice out loud is because you can hear, does this sound like me? Am I going to remember this? Is it something that's going to stick with my audience? A tricolon is a device that we kind of use. Have you ever heard of that? The magic of threes. There's a Latin phrase. It's like omni trium perfectum, which I think is everything in threes is perfect. So you got that going for you. But three is kind of a magical number. It's one of those things that humans recognize that pattern, and it helps the audience absorb and make things easier to remember because of the rhythm and the pattern in it. And especially if that example is kind of graduating, building up to a bigger finish, then it's easier for people to remember. Of the people, by the people, for the people, blood, sweat, and tears, beer, wine, and cheese, stuff like that. It's easier to remember, certainly is for me, and I think it is, generally speaking, for most humans as well.
So the element of surprise is something that you can use to grab your audience's attention, and keeping things interesting is what is going to help keep their attention. So, Carol was just kind of talking about that rule of threes and some patterns. Our human brains, we're wired to expect patterns. And so one thing we can do that can create surprise and maintain interest is we throw something unexpected into our presentation. So, I mean, this comes from our, our survival aspect from evolution, needing to recognize threats in our environments, and we're especially tuned to them. So when we have something that breaks the pattern, such as humor, it's immediately recognizable. And humor tends to be the best way to do this. You can break tension, you can make something memorable and sticky, and it also performs a uniquely human function, and that is that it actually disables our cognitive function of our brain. So it actually breaks the way that your brain is working. It momentarily disarms it, and then it makes the listener more likely to hear what you're saying and then take it to heart.
So our final letter is S for story. Why is story important? Because humans remember gist more than they do the details. So you'll remember Goldilocks. You'll remember the moral of the story, how it all turns out. You may forget the details here and there along the way, but that's kind of how we remember. Even when you dream, you're dreaming in a story. The story's sometimes crazy, doesn't make sense, but it's sequential and it's episodic. And remember when Jeff spoke earlier about emotion, making something sticky. This is another way that comes back. Telling a story helps you appeal to human emotion. It's really important in any presentation that you're doing to be unique, to be you. Chances are, if you're trying to win a project, the rest of the committee, your audience has heard a whole bunch of presentations that day. So you want to make it easy to stand out in the crowd. You want to make it easy for them to select you. So be memorable, be unique, be yourself. Obviously, it's what you do best. Our tagline at our company is results beyond architecture. That's what we talk about a lot. And we demonstrate that through stories about outcomes. We don't talk about, the quote that Jeff had earlier, don't tell them how to build the watch, tell them what they can do with the watch. That's how we talk. That's how we think about it. So we talk about the way that our work impacts people. So I can tell you about a parking lot that we did. I can tell you about how we sited it to take advantage of the topo, that it has 2 levels underground. I can tell you what we made it out of and how we detailed it. I can tell you maybe that it had an automated parking system. I can even tell you that, how many spaces were there and that it was really great. But if I can show you that somebody actually got married in that parking deck during the pandemic, that has an impact and an emotion tied to it that makes it automatically memorable. If I can tell you that they exchanged vows that they wrote themselves, and they even worked a few jokes in about the parking deck and that they were getting married in a parking deck, if I can tell you how they invited their family and the most significant people in their pod for maybe one of the most important days in their lives, and that they drove out of the parking garage in a pink Cadillac Eldorado, that leaves an impression with you. Those are all details that are quick, easy to understand, but you've got this memory of, these things, that this happened in that parking deck. It's unusual, it's different, it's unexpected, it's memorable. So the way talking about it that way is obviously a very different way than when I first started talking about it, when I was saying I could tell you how we sited it, what we made it out of, and how many parking spaces there were. Because what I'm giving to you in that second explanation of the parking deck, where I was talking about the couple that got married, was that I'm placing facts in a context and delivering it with that emotional impact, rather than just giving you fact, 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 that things that aren't really strung together. So when you're talking about designing a place, talk about the meaningful impact that the systems or the engineering will have on the people using that space. And if you can tie it to, an actual example of something that happened or something that will happen because of it, makes a difference, and it makes that emotional impact on your audience. So now I think we have our last poll question before we get to our last letter. So if we can deploy that, thank you. And that poll question is, what part of specs, that simple, positive, empathetic, confident, and story, do you think will help you the most to improve the way that you do persuasive presentations?
Wow. So we had just about 60% of the audience says that keeping it simple and relatable will help them improve the most. And being a fellow engineer, I would probably agree with that because we tend to want to dive right into details and tell you every single little thing about the design and all the components. And instead, we do need to remember to keep it simple. And the distant second was using story. Followed by confidence, and then empathy and the positive benefits. And I think if you can keep it simple and you can tell that story, and in that story and in keeping it simple, you can make sure that you're showing those positive benefits. I mean, you can pretty much kill 3 birds with 1 stone there.
Yeah, and speaking as an architect, when I meet with engineers who are always way smarter than I am, it's really great when I find one who can explain, again, a very complicated concept to me in terms that I understand. Frequently when I'm meeting with younger folks in the profession, I'll say, explain it like you were explaining it to your grandmother. I'm not saying dumb it down, I'm just saying simplify the concepts in a way that she would understand it, having no background in engineering or design or construction, hopefully. So think about it. I think it's great that 60% of you say that that's going to help you, because I think honestly, that probably does have the greatest impact. And I think it may be one of the hardest things to do. We constantly have to keep asking ourselves, is this understandable? Is this easy to understand? Can people get what I'm trying to get? And those 2 slides that Jeff had earlier on, saying if we communicate nothing else, we have to do this. Always keep that in mind. I think another really good thing when you are practicing in front of someone who doesn't know what you're talking about or doesn't know the pitch that you're making, is not deeply involved, has no experience with the thing that you're trying to do, and ask them what they hear, present in front of them and say, what did you get from that? What did you hear? What did you think was most important? What stuck with you? What had the most impact when I talked with you? And then you'll understand how your audience may also be hearing it, seeing what you're presenting, hearing what you're talking about. Because again, we know all the detail. We know exactly what we're trying to communicate and everything else that backs it up, that goes behind it. Your audience doesn't always have to know that thing. They have to know the most important thing that you want them to remember. You want them to know, this is why you need to pick our team, or this is why this system is the best system. So constantly toggle in, get into the detail of it, but then toggle back and look at it from 30,000 feet, and enlist the help of other people who are around you, but maybe not as immersed in the thing that you're trying to do as you are.
Yeah, Carol pulled
Okay.
me into a presentation prep for one project that they were going after, and basically I sat as the audience, and I had no part in the preparation. I didn't know a whole lot about the project, but I listened to their whole presentation. I was taking notes, and basically I was able to say back to them, okay, here's what really stood out for me.
Yeah.
Here's what I think you need to put some more emphasis on, because this really resonated with me if I'm in the client's shoes. And I think maybe we need to de-emphasize, this thing over here and this thing over here, just because I don't think it quite has the, the impact that we're looking for.
Right.
I think let's spend more time here and maybe some, less time here. And and we've started doing that more and more, is having that kind of uninvolved third party play the role of the audience. And I think we've been able to gain some great insight from it. It really helps us tighten things up, keep things simple, and really focus on what's most important.
Yeah, it really does. And it's so helpful because a lot of times you're thinking, I'm really selling concept A, and the other person will come up with something completely different, and you'll think, wow, okay, where did we get off track? And being able to ask that of that person and say, where did I lose you? Because this is what I was trying to really communicate, is super helpful and allows you to go back, pare it down, rearrange things, and put it back out there in a way that's absolutely positively conveying what you want your audience to get from it, the most important things. And so try never to lose sight of those things, and then you'll be on good footing. Okay, so that's it in total. You know the secrets now of being a persuasive presenter. I have no doubt that you're already a better presenter because you're thinking about these things. So when in doubt, remember specs: simple, positive, empathetic, confident, and story. And those pieces will come together to create that persuasive presentation for you and to help your audience, think of you as being memorable and unique and appeal to both the head and the heart of your audience. And now we're ready to take any questions that may have come in while we were talking.
Great. So first we've got a comment from Kevin Summers, who is also a Lawrence Tech engineering grad.
Blue Devils, go Blue Devils, the real Blue Devils, not those Duke people.
All right, another question. I know we need to avoid overt details. What do you suggest as a technique to encourage questions that allow you to address important details, even if they aren't the headline or core idea?
I think if you start, from my standpoint anyway, and then Jeff can give you his opinion as well, I think if you start with the big picture and you convey kind of what you're trying to accomplish, then you can break into the details. But I think starting with that big picture helps your audience understand the expectation. They have an expectation in their mind about what you're about to talk about. So if they understand the overarching picture and the concept, the big concept you're trying to deliver, then at that point, if you start to break into the details, and you always check back in with them and say, does that make sense? You know, am I on the right track, or is that what you were asking about, or do you really want to know something different? I think being able to ask a clarifying question is always helpful, and it'll tell you, because you may have one idea and head down a path where they're, it's more than they need. So I think asking a clarifying question is always very helpful, and then giving them the detail after you give them the big picture is helpful too. Jeff, do you have any feedback on that?
Yeah, I was thinking as like an example right now, we're dealing with COVID and HVAC systems, and how do we improve them? And I'm just thinking, making that pitch of talking to a client about, we're going to help you make your building occupants healthier. And then here's how we're going to do it. We're going to talk, we're going to increase the outside air because that's bringing in the fresh air. We're going to increase the filtration because that's going to catch more particles. So give them something that frames it, that big picture, as Carol said, and then getting into the details. And the other thing, the clarifying questions, that's something that we when we're doing our interview prep, kind of anticipating maybe what questions will be thrown at us. But one of the first things we always want to do is follow up the client's question with a kind of a clarifying question to make sure we understand. Because how many times have you been in an interview and somebody talks for 5 minutes giving an answer, and the person who asked the question went, yeah, that's not really what I was talking about. I'm really looking for this. And if you would have just stopped for a second, thought, and asked, okay, do you want me to talk about this? Do you want me to talk more about this? And they kind of give you more of that answer. And practicing those listening skills, truly listening to listen and understand what they're asking. We found that to be very helpful, and certainly saves you some time and egg on your face from answering a question that they didn't really want answered in the first place.
I think also in the Q&A, like, I firmly believe that you can win a project in Q&A if you're going in to make a pitch to a client. I feel like what that does is, at the end of a presentation, you've said your piece, you're never going to remember all of it, right? So you're going to remember, there's 100% that you're going to have to talk about, you'll remember 70. So at that point, when you realize at this point, okay, I forgot to talk about this, this, and this, when someone asks a question, a lot of times answer their question directly, and then you might be able to weave back in the pieces that you had missed previously that relate to that question that are important. And it's a really good conversational way for you to work that content in without it being forced, and having it appeal directly to the question that they may have asked you.
Great. Are there any techniques that can help you build confidence in a subject that you are inherently not confident about?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think so. Personally, for me, when Jeff talked about writing things out longhand, for me, that helps me imprint it in my brain. There's something, I'm a certain age, so if the physical act of writing it, and actually there is human neurobiology behind it, physical act of doing something, that muscle memory helps you remember it, that kinetic connection between ideas that are lodged into your brain and actual movement. So for me, if I'm doing something that I'm not completely 100% on, if I do my research and I write it out longhand, and I'm writing out, again, what I'm going to be talking about, that helps me get it imprinted more into my brain. And even though I may not know all the details about it, if I can convey the larger concepts, that's okay. I think that's enough. generally speaking, unless someone asks you the absolute detail, hopefully which you've got written on notes somewhere.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's, I would say it's the practice part of it, which you should be doing anyway, because if you have a time limit, you know, okay, we're giving you 20 minutes to present, and then we're going to have 10 minutes for Q&A. You never want to like take 30 minutes to present and have no time. And so you know, that's why that practicing multiple times, timing yourself, hearing yourself out loud, videotaping yourself, critiquing yourself. I think, you know, it's part of it is that knowledge. You get confidence from having the knowledge, but I think you really gain a lot of confidence from practicing it. And just, you put, every time you do it, it puts your mind at ease that you know it better, you know it better. You're, you know, you forget less that you want to say. You're confident that your timing is going to work out right. And then at that point, really, you can start focusing on, you know, the vocal inflections, the hand gestures, the purposeful pauses to get the audience to stop and start paying attention to you again in case they've lost track. So the practice side of it for me is huge.
Okay, last question. To what extent would the audience influence telling them about the wedding in the parking deck versus giving them technical details?
Can you restate the question, Katie? I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand it.
Sure. To what extent does the audience influence telling them about the wedding in the parking deck versus giving them technical details?
Well, again, I guess some of it depends on what you're trying to convey. I mean, if we're going into an interview and it's an interview that includes like a parking structure, you know, like I said, we can say we've done 2,500 spaces, you know, or 25,000 spaces. And I might drop that in the beginning so that it shows kind of bona fides that you've done it. And then I would probably drop in the piece about this parking deck and the wedding that was, you know, in the parking deck, because I think that it conveys that this parking deck, while it housed 20, you know, however many cars in it, it also did more than that. It was something that was important enough, nice enough looking, whatever the factors were that made that couple select it to be married in. It's different, you know, it's not just a parking deck. It was something that was meaningful enough to them that they had their wedding in it, which is, I find still interestingly weird, but it happened. I had nothing to do with it. So then I think at that point, if you wanted to go into greater detail, you could say, you know, but aside from that, if you wanted to talk about the details, we've done, you know, concrete tees, whatever, however, what kind of detail you wanted to go in. Again, it's that same framing the big idea and then dropping into the detail after that. Jeff, do you have any input on that one?
Yeah, I was going to say, to add on to that, you know, the whole point is, let's say you're going to have, you know, 4 civil structural engineers that are shortlisted to do this parking deck, and they're all saying the same thing from a detail standpoint and the same experience. But one group talked about this sticky moment, this memorable moment of how we designed a parking deck that somebody decided was nice enough to actually host a wedding in, because it was outside, it was interesting, it was unique. We like this parking deck for this reason. And you tell that story. If I'm on the selection committee, you know, I heard 4 hours of technical details, but you know, there is that one firm that, gosh, they had those people get married. Can you believe that? Somebody actually got married on that party. It just gives them something to talk about, which makes them remember you. And I was thinking, Carol, the one project we did in Florida where we refaced that building and made that really interesting architectural element, and I wouldn't know what it's called, but all of a sudden our clients started telling us that they were noticing people coming to take like family portraits and engagement photos. The credit union project, They were like noticing, because we created this really cool area. We had no intention of doing that, but now we can tell that story when we go to another client and they're like, wow, these guys created such a cool space that people want to go and have their family portraits taken in, you know, under this, what would you call that? I don't know what it was called.
It's basically an extracted rain screen kind of a detail in the front of it. It creates a plaza in front of this, in front of the credit union.
So, you know, I guess for my fellow engineers in the audience, does it have technical details to it that the client might want to hear? No. Is it a memorable moment that will stick in their mind? Yes. And that's how we can help differentiate ourselves from our competition.
And with the example that Jeff gave, that helps a client who's a credit union say, okay, well, my building's obviously memorable. My building, you know, people who are driving by are seeing it. Maybe I'll get some additional customers from that. I mean, that's kind of where the benefit comes in for that, is that it raises the visibility rather of the building. And that increased visibility potentially to them means more customers, more members for a credit union.
All right, Carol and Jeff, I think that's all the questions that we have. Do you have any last final thoughts?
No, I mean, for me, what I would say in closing is just remember to keep it simple. Remember to step back now and then and to really think about what you're saying and listen to what you're saying so that you can make sure you're conveying what you really want to convey.
Practice, practice, practice.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being with us. Everyone on the call, your PDH form and NC-BEL survey will be emailed out to you shortly. Our last session of the seminar is at 4 p.m. and it is leadership in a virtual setting. So I will see you all soon. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.